Hello everyone, welcome to our podcast video. We are from Anthropolinguistics class with my teams are going to discuss our finding in the study about Chinese Indonesian ethnic. Well, to begin with, Indonesia is a plural country with various ethnic. From this, each individually in an ethnic has an identity, a different character for individual or group characteristic. In response, Indonesia has Chinese Indonesian ethnic, shortened Chindo. The term refers to individuals born in China or individuals with Chinese ancestry who acquire permanent citizenship or temporarily relocate to Indonesia. The focus of this study is on descriptive linguistic and sociolinguistic. Descriptive linguistic focus on the meaning of certain words in Chinese that are often used for Chindos and how it is constructed and how different sounds and words are put together in different circumstances. And sociolinguistics focus on how that language is related to belief and pattern of thought in that community, meanings of concept and terms.
Okay, why is it important to talk about Chinese Indonesian or Chindos? Firstly, let's talk about the history and what becomes the background of the study. According to National Geographic Indonesia, historical records reveal a large influx of Chinese immigrants between the 18th and 20th centuries. During the Dutch colonial era, many Chinese immigrants came to work on plantation and tin mines. This migration peaked with the arrival of approximately 500,000 Chinese to the Dutch East Indies in the early 1900s. A demographer, Said Hasbullah, stated that during this migration wave, there were also instances of fusion in intermarrying. In 2020, the number of diaspora communities from China and Indonesia will be the highest in the world, account for about 4 until 5% of the total population in Indonesia. The Hokkien tribe, Hakka tribe, Teochew tribe, and Cantonese tribe are some of the Chinese tribes that live in Indonesia. Because of these population mixings, Chinese and Indonesian cultures are united, including in the field of communication. For generations, the Chinese have been living with a lot of issues, particularly its relations with Indonesian society in general.
Well, for our topic today, we have conducted direct research about this Chinese Indonesian community who live in Indonesia. It is expected to answer the main research question: how do Chindos use languages in different circumstances? And what are the beliefs and patterns of thought in those languages used? The method used in this research is qualitative by doing fieldwork and little interview. The observation was conducted offline by living together with the community for a week long and interviewing questions regarding particular language and the pattern. We could observe the community with the fellow Chindo family when they were gathering and have casual chatting like having a meal together, playing and asking. We are also discussing communication with Indonesian native, their interaction with surrounding community. Here, we have a gatekeeper named Mrs. Suryani Cahyono, simple called Mrs. Ani, one of the Chindo community who gave us access to her family. We had 10 people for the data sample who are mostly Mrs. Suryani's family lives on 2 roofs. The activity was planned to be a daily activity.
Okay, firstly, let's talk about their identity matters in Indonesia. It is the distinctive characteristics of a group which relate to who they are and what is meaningful to them, including the ongoing process of self-development and definition of personal identity through which they formulate a unique sense of themselves, and relationship to the world around them. This discussion about identity roots to interaction with fellow Chindo families. They have special calling used to address family in Chinese. For the core family, those are Keke means elder brother, Titi means younger brother, Cece means elder sister, and Meme means younger sister.
Okay. There are one grandmother and two core families in the house. Mrs. Annie's core family and her elder brother's family named Mr. Udin and Mrs. Annie. And Mrs. Udin's children call their grandmother Ama. There are actually various calls for each family member in the Chinese lineage, let alone extended family. Mrs. Annie's children call their uncle Mr. Udin with Kuku and his wife Kim because Mr. Udin is mainline in the family. However, it differs from how Mrs. Udin's children call Mrs. Annie and her husband. They call their auntie, Mrs. Annie, with Ako and her husband, Achu, because Mrs. Annie is a woman in the family.
We may think that it's quite confusing, as in Indonesian or English, we can only need to call auntie and uncle. One of Mr. Udin's sons said that, of course, they don't have to memorize everything. It is enough to know according to the condition of each family. Just don't knock or call the wrong one. That's a bit comical. They also said that there are still certain times when the younger generation of Chinese Indonesian are confused, like at the moment of the Lunar New Year, when all families member gathers. Ironically, not a few generations of their parents also forget. As a result, all that's left is to call on, oma, and opa, so that it won't be complicated.
Well, in fact, there are some cultural reasons behind why it is divided with the father and mother lineage. The Chinese tradition is patrilineal. Clan is passed down from father, so indirectly the aspects are just adjusted accordingly. The second is usually the name of the generation based on genealogy. It describes one genealogical name used for one generation, and next generation will have different genealogical name. Here comes the question that if you make a wrong call or knock, is there any penalty? The answer is no, there's nothing. At most, they will get a short lecture on the family tree, like child is this, and whose uncle is this one's cousin, that one, and so on and so forth.
Okay, to add some information, Mrs. Turiani told us that she comes originally from Hokkien family and is raised by her mom, who speaks Hokkien most of the time. For this data sample, she speaks Hokkien language with people that she knew that they also speaks Hokkien. For example, her mother and her brother, Mr. Udin. Yet, their children are not taught Chinese, so they cannot speak Chinese at all. Mrs. Ani and Mr. Udin choose to speak in Indonesian to their children. Then we asked, why do they do so? It is because they live in an environment where, even though there are many ethnic Chinese, they still use Indonesian. The second reason is because younger generation, including their children, are not eager to learn Chinese and prefer to master English.
Then, this diversification expanded to what is referred to as superdiversity. The diversification of diversity, a concept introduced by Stephen Butterworth to describe phenomena of migration and multiculturalism within a community. This dimension of multiculturalism doesn't only refer to nationality and origin, but also in social and economic characteristics.
On the other hand, Mrs. Ani and Mr. Udin do not just speak Chinese, just like that to all Chinese Indonesian people. Mr. Udin's wife, named Mrs. Melan, for example, she is originally comes from Banyuwangi, and her family doesn't speak Chinese at all. The percentage of people of Chinese descent who can speak Mandarin is only little, at least around 10%, and on average are the elderly. At first, we were surprised that some people in this family have Porus or Medok accent like the majority of Javanese people. Mrs. Milan cannot speak or read in Chinese, most only general terms such as in money. Why is that? Because there is no strong regeneration to speak Mandarin due to the history of discriminatory towards Chinese Indonesians. So their dominant language in Indonesia and their respective regional language is Indonesia. It's just my face that looks like Chinese, but I understand Japanese more. So why bothering myself by speaking Chinese? There, Mrs. Melan joked.
Well, now let's go on to our next topic. After studying their communication with fellow ethnic, we are studying their communication with Indonesian natives or known as Pribumi people, including its code mixing. The background behind these inquiries is social self-identity, the basis of self-consciousness in human individuals. According to George Herbert theory, the social self is the identity conferred upon an individual by reacting of others. A person achieves self-consciousness by becoming aware of the social identity. One important thing is that most of the community work in the business field, including the sample data. Mrs. Ani is owning and managing a small spare part company with her husband, as well as Mr. Udin, who is owning and managing a seafood distribution company with his wife. If we take a look further in quantity, there are a minority, but in a relative short time, they have success and occupy a dominant position in the economic sector in Indonesia.
Yes, and in just a few generations, they managed to change fate and raise the level of their social life. In fact, Indonesian natives are their employees. Mrs. Ani and Mr. Udin's company employs household assistants, nanny, personal driver, even children and private teachers are all Indonesian natives. Thus, of course, they interact a lot with Indonesian natives. Their communication competence is quite good, proven that they can live side by side with other tribal communities for a long time. As mentioned in the first subtopic, Chinese Indonesian have slang or special jargon that is only understood by the circle. In communicating daily with the surrounding community, Chindos have spatial markers that influence their native language, Mandarin and Hokkien. In daily communication with Indonesian natives, Chinese or Chinese people often use a mixed Indonesian, Japanese, Mandarin, and etc.
The interesting thing is the influence of both dialect and variation in communication between Chindos and other communities. Means a minority community identifies themselves with dominant language varieties such as Indonesian and Javanese. Code markers that characterize the language of the community appear. So this study produced a reasonable description of the inter-ethnic linguistic situation in the country of Indonesia.
Still, there are certain distinctive characteristics between how Chindos and Indonesian people speak Indonesian, as listener will know where the participants come from. This is caused by features that mark the language used, including the level of sound, word or lexicon, sentence structure, and intonation. At some communication, even, the older generation of Chindos has speech markers, such as being unable to pronounce the sound r and replaced with l, the sound t replaced with k. Some examples are the emergence of the word murah become mula, and the word liat become liak, and so on.
This is very understandable because the older generation are still heavily influenced by their native language in China, whereas for the younger generation, the language is already different from the language of the older generation because of well-established interethnic relations between Indonesians and Chinese. This is very influential on the language situation itself because the language is very easy to change following the dynamics of society. The younger generation of Chinese ethnicity already has a pronunciation that is almost the same as the pronunciation of Indonesian people. Even so, the slightest difference in pronunciation will be clearly heard if they communicate together.
Besides, lexicon levels also become factor differentiate Chindo's communication. In communicating with other ethnicities like Indonesian natives, Chindo adapt the language to the way of speaking the local community or the dominant community, Indonesian and Javanese. Chindo sometimes mix the greeting with Indonesian language. Example given in the sentence, Taci gak ada di gudang, means Mrs. Ani is not at the warehouse currently. Or coba tanya Koko, means try to ask brother.
The other interesting thing here is words in Indonesia or Japanese experience adjustment to Chinese pronunciation. Most words that we often hear spoken by this community are taken from the word pergi means go. It omits r and replaces it with I. Some possessive suffix nya in Indonesian is spoken a by Chindos. Example in the sentence aku nggak tahu namanya in Indonesia is aku nggak tahu namanya means I don't know his name, and then the use of I instead of nya is to express the meaning of her, his, and its. The word Derek originally comes from the Javanese Dewi. Is also one of the linguistic markers of Chindos to express the meaning of on or alone. The use of these words in the context of a sentence becomes the characteristics of Chindo ethnic markers.
Taking a look further regarding this blending, although in the previous era, discrimination was felt, where currently the blending of them is quite good. Indonesian natives call Chindos with Chinese greeting words or kinship systems like Paci, Koko, Cece, Meme, Engkong, Titi, Noni, and so on. And vice versa, Chinese Indonesians call Indonesian natives with greeting words in Indonesia like Pak, Bu, Mbak, Suster, Mas, and so on.
Yes, additionally, on one occasion, this family gave us information that if a Chinese marries a Javanese, he or she will automatically call or greet with Javanese terms of wife or husband's side, such as Pak De, Pak Le, grandmother, Bude, and so on. The companion also calls her husband or wife's family with typically Chinese names such as Koko, Suk, Engkong, Ayi, and so on. Things like this turn out to be very effective to glue interethnic relations so that they feel one without discrimination. Yeah, those are some linguistic markers or varieties of Chinese Indonesian community when communicating with their fellow ethnic groups as well as with other ethnic groups.
Okay, now we come to the conclusion. We can conclude that the Chinese ethnic that live in Indonesia has self-identity and social identity, in which the divergent element is very meaningful.
Culture as all the modes of thought, behavior, and production, as well as Chinese Indonesian ethnics, are handed down from one generation to the next. Acculturation and cultural assimilation considered part of the Indonesian national sphere by means of communicative interactions language, gestures, writing, building, and all other communication among humans, rather than by generic transmission or heredity. And therefore, this research explains both descriptive linguistics and sociolinguistics in this community, and as expected, it can be elaborated in the report.
Well, those are our reports for our anthropolinguistic podcast about Chinese Indonesian. Thank you for your attention and see you on the next occasion. See you. Bye.